The sweat dripped from Eleanor Garrett's brow as she scrubbed another pair of muddy trousers against the washboard, her knuckles raw and bleeding in the lamplight that flickered across the wooden walls of the washhouse behind the boarding establishment, where she worked 7 days a week in Yosemite, California. It was nearing midnight on a Friday in July of 1883, and the pile of soiled linens seemed to grow rather than shrink with each piece she dragged from the basket, her back screaming in protest as she bent over the tub for what felt like the 1,000th time that evening. The summer heat lingered even at this late hour, making the small washhouse feel like an oven, and Eleanor wondered if she would ever know what it meant to simply rest, to sleep without her hands throbbing, to wake without dreading the mountain of work that awaited her each dawn. She had been doing this work since she was 16, 2 years now, ever since her father died in a mining accident up in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and her mother succumbed to pneumonia that same winter, leaving Eleanor alone in a world that cared little for orphaned girls with no family and no prospects. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Hutchins, had taken her in, but kindness had its limits, and Eleanor earned her keep through endless labor that left her exhausted to her bones. She took in washing from half the town, scrubbing clothes for miners, cowboys, merchants, and anyone else who could spare a few coins, working from before sunrise until well past midnight most nights, her youth slipping away in clouds of lye soap and steam. The door to the washhouse creaked open, and Eleanor jumped, her heart pounding as she spun around, clutching the scrub brush like a weapon. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, broad-shouldered and wearing a hat that cast his face in shadow. For a moment, fear gripped her, because midnight visitors were rarely innocent, and a young woman alone was vulnerable in ways that kept her awake even when exhaustion tried to claim her. "I did not mean to startle you, miss," a deep voice said, gentle despite its roughness, and the man stepped into the lamplight, removing his hat to reveal a weathered but handsome face, probably no more than 22 or 23 years old, with dark hair and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. "I am Ryan Edwards. I have been riding past here for the last 3 nights, coming back from checking cattle on the northern range, and each time I see you working at this hour. It is not right. You need to rest." Eleanor straightened, wiping her wet hands on her already soaked apron, trying to compose herself despite her exhaustion. "I appreciate your concern, mister, but I have work that needs finishing. These clothes will not wash themselves, and Mrs. Hutchins expects them ready by morning." Ryan stepped closer, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor, and she could see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened as he looked at her raw hands, and the dark circles she knew shadowed her eyes. He was a cowboy. That much was clear from his worn leather chaps and the way he carried himself, that easy confidence of a man who spent his days in the saddle working cattle across the vast California ranges. "How old are you?" he asked, his voice softer now. 18 last month, Eleanor replied, lifting her chin with what little pride she could muster. "Old enough to work for my living." "Old enough to work yourself to death, you mean," Ryan said, and there was something in his tone that made her throat tighten, because it had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with genuine care, since anyone had looked at her as more than just a pair of hands to scrub their clothes. "I know Mrs. Hutchins. She is a hard woman who squeezes every last drop from those who work for her, but this is beyond reasonable. You cannot keep going like this." "I do not have a choice," Eleanor said, hating how her voice wavered, how close she was to tears. She was so tired, bone-tired in a way that sleep could not fix because it went deeper than physical exhaustion. "I have nowhere else to go, no family, no money saved. If I do not work, I do not eat. If I do not work, I have no roof over my head. That is just how things are." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those storm-colored eyes, and she felt exposed under his gaze, as though he could see every fear and desperate hope she kept locked inside. Then he moved to the washtub, setting his hat on a nearby stool, and began rolling up his sleeves. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, bewildered. "Helping you finish so you can get some rest," Ryan said simply, plunging his hands into the soapy water and grabbing a shirt. "Show me what to do. You cannot be serious. You are a cowboy, not a washer worker. Your hands are not made for this kind of work." "My hands are made for whatever work needs doing," Ryan replied, already scrubbing at the fabric with a determination that surprised her. "And right now, what needs doing is getting you out of here and into bed before you collapse. I have seen horses worked less hard than you, and we treat our horses better than this." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the walls she had built around herself, but the kindness in his gesture cracked something inside her, and before she knew it, she was standing beside him, showing him how to work the soap into the fabric, how to scrub at the stubborn stains, how to wring out the excess water. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of the labor becoming almost meditative, and Eleanor found herself stealing glances at this stranger who had appeared in her wash house like an answer to a prayer she had been too tired to voice. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. "You do not know me. You have no obligation to help me." Ryan paused in his scrubbing, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "My mother died when I was 15, he said quietly. "She worked herself to death trying to keep our small ranch going after my father was killed by rustlers. I watched her fade away, watched her hands become raw and bleeding just like yours, watched her push herself past exhaustion day after day because she thought she had no other choice. I was too young then to understand, too young to know how to help her properly. But I am not too young anymore, and when I see a young woman killing herself with work, I cannot just ride past. I will not be that person." The rawness in his voice, the pain of old grief, reached something deep inside Eleanor, and she found herself blinking back tears. "I am sorry about your mother. That must have been terrible. It was, it is. But maybe some good can come from it if I can keep another person from walking that same path." He resumed his scrubbing, and Eleanor did the same, but something had shifted between them, some invisible thread connecting their shared losses and loneliness. They worked together until the pile of dirty laundry finally disappeared. The clean clothes hung on lines stretched across the washhouse to dry. It was past 1 in the morning when they finished, and Eleanor swayed on her feet, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow now that the work was done. "Easy," Ryan said, catching her elbow as she stumbled. "When did you last eat?" Eleanor tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, I think, maybe. I had some bread and butter." Ryan's jaw tightened and he guided her firmly toward the door. "Come on. The boarding house dining room should have something, and if it does not, I have supplies in my saddlebags." "I cannot just take your food," Eleanor protested weakly, even as her stomach cramped with hunger. "You are not taking anything. I am offering it and you are accepting because you need it." His tone left no room for argument, and Eleanor was too tired to fight anyway. The boarding house was dark and quiet as they slipped inside through the back entrance, Ryan moving with surprising stealth for such a large man. The kitchen was empty, and he found bread, cheese, and some cold chicken, arranging it all on a plate and pushing it toward her insistently. Eleanor ate mechanically at first, then with growing hunger, barely pausing to breathe as she consumed everything he put in front of her. "When did this start?" Ryan asked, sitting across from her at the rough wooden table. "The endless work, I mean. Has it always been this way?" Eleanor shook her head, swallowing her food. It got worse about 6 months ago. Mrs. Hutchins decided she could make more money if we took in washing from outside the boarding house. So now, I do laundry for half the town on top of my regular duties. But I get a small percentage of the profits, so I have been saving every penny I can, hoping that maybe someday I will have enough to leave to start fresh somewhere else. How much have you saved? $14.37, Eleanor said, and the pride she felt at that small sum was immediately crushed by the reality of how little it truly was. I know it is not much. I know it would not get me far, but it is something. Ryan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I work for the Double R Ranch, about an hour's ride north of town. It is a big operation, runs about 5,000 head of cattle across the foothills. The owner, Mr. Richardson, his wife just had a baby, and she has been looking for help with the household, someone to help with cooking and cleaning and eventually minding the children as they grow. It is hard work, but nothing like what you are doing now. Regular hours, decent pay, room and board included. If you wanted, I could put in a word for you. Hope flared in Eleanor's chest, bright and painful. Why would you do that for me? Why would Mr. Richardson listen to you? I have been working at the Double R for 5 years, since I was 17. Started as a stable hand and worked my way up. Mr. Richardson trusts my judgment, and his wife, Mary, is a good woman who would treat you fairly. As for why I would do it, I already told you. I cannot stand by and watch someone work themselves to death when I have the power to help. Eleanor stared at him, this stranger who had appeared in her life like a miracle, offering her a way out of the trap she had been caught in for so long. I would have to give Mrs. Hutchins notice. She would not be happy. Mrs. Hutchins does not have to be happy. You do not owe her your life. Ryan reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers gently. You will rest now, I insist, and tomorrow, if you are willing, we will ride out to the Double R and talk to the Richardsons. A new start, Eleanor. You deserve that. Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, hot and unchecked, years of exhaustion and fear and desperate hope finally breaking through the walls she had built. I do not even know you. How can you care what happens to me? Ryan's thumb brushed across her knuckles, careful of the raw skin. Maybe I do not know you yet, but I would like to. And maybe caring for someone does not require a long acquaintance. Maybe sometimes you just recognize someone who needs help, and you give it because it is the right thing to do. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and Ryan squeezed her hand gently before standing. Go to bed now. Get some real sleep. I will come by tomorrow at noon and we will ride out to the ranch together. Everything is going to be all right, Eleanor. I promise you that. She watched him leave. This cowboy who had insisted she rest, who had worked beside her without complaint, who had offered her hope when she had nearly forgotten what that felt like. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor went to sleep believing that maybe, just maybe, things could actually get better. The morning sun was already climbing high when Eleanor finally woke, startled to realize she had slept through the dawn for the first time in 2 years. Panic gripped her immediately as she thought of all the work waiting, but then she remembered Ryan's words, his promise, and she forced herself to breathe slowly. She dressed in her cleanest dress, which was not saying much given the state of her limited wardrobe, and braided her dark blonde hair as neatly as she could manage. Mrs. Hutchins was in the dining room when Eleanor came downstairs, her sharp eyes immediately fixing on her young employee. You slept late. There are guests waiting for fresh linens and the breakfast dishes need washing. Mrs. Hutchins, I need to speak with you, Eleanor said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite her nervousness. I am giving you notice. I am leaving. The older woman's face darkened. Leaving. You have nowhere to go, girl. What foolishness has gotten into your head? I have been offered a position at the Double R Ranch, helping Mrs. Richardson with the household. Better pay, reasonable hours, room and board. I am grateful for everything you have done for me, but I cannot continue working the way I have been. It is too much. Mrs. Hutchins stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You ungrateful wretch. I took you in when you had nothing, gave you work and a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me. By leaving when I need you most. Eleanor felt the old fear trying to reassert itself, the instinct to back down and apologize and return to her miserable routine. But then she thought of Ryan's steady gaze, his insistence that she deserved better, and she found her spine. You took me in because I could work for you practically for free. You have profited from my labor for 2 years, and I have earned my keep 10 times over. I am leaving, Mrs. Hutchins, and nothing you say will change my mind. Fine. Go then. But do not come crawling back when your fancy new position does not work out. And I want those linens finished before you leave. You understand? I will not be left without clean sheets because you have gotten uppity. I will finish them, Eleanor said quietly, and she retreated to the wash-house, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. The morning passed in a blur of work, Eleanor pushing through one last marathon of washing and hanging, determined to leave no loose ends that Mrs. Hutchins could use to claim she had abandoned her responsibilities. She was hanging the final sheet when she heard the sound of hoofbeats, and she turned to see Ryan riding into the yard on a handsome bay horse, leading another horse behind him, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Are you ready?" he asked, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent half his life on horseback. "Almost. Let me pack my things. It will not take long." Eleanor had so few possessions that everything fit into a single battered carpet bag, her entire life reduced to a few changes of clothes, a brush, and the small tin where she kept her savings. When she emerged from the boarding house, Ryan was waiting, and he helped her mount the mare with careful hands, steadying her until she found her seat. They rode out of Yosemite heading north, following a well-worn trail that climbed into the foothills, the landscape opening up into rolling grasslands dotted with oak trees and granite outcroppings. The summer sun was hot overhead, but a breeze swept down from the higher elevations, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Eleanor had rarely left the town, and she found herself marveling at the vastness of the open country, the way the world seemed to expand endlessly in all directions. Ryan rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the ranch, his voice easy and comfortable, as though they had known each other for years rather than hours. He told her about the other cowboys who worked at the Double R, about Mr. Richardson's commitment to treating his workers fairly, about the hard but honest work of running a cattle operation in the California foothills. "You seem to love it, the cowboy life," Eleanor observed, watching the way his entire posture relaxed in the saddle, the way he scanned the landscape with the practiced eye of someone who knew every ridge and valley. "I do. It is a hard life, but it is honest. You work hard and you see the results. You help bring new calves into the world, you keep the herd healthy, you get them safely to market. There is a satisfaction in that, in knowing your work matters." He glanced at her, his gray eyes warm. "What about you? What would you do if you could do anything? If money and circumstances were not an obstacle?" Eleanor had never really let herself think about such things, but she found herself answering honestly. "I would like to have a little house somewhere with a garden. I would grow vegetables and flowers and maybe keep some chickens. I would have time to read books and sew nice things, not just mend torn clothes. And I would have a family, people who loved me and whom I could love back. That probably sounds foolish. It sounds perfect, Ryan said quietly. It sounds like exactly the kind of life everyone should have the chance to build. They reached the Double R Ranch just after 2 in the afternoon, riding under a wooden archway with the ranch brand burned into the crossbeam. The main house was substantial, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and whitewashed walls, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Cowboys moved about their business, some working with horses, others repairing tack or fence lines, and several called out greetings to Ryan as he passed. He led Eleanor to the main house, helping her dismount and tying the horses to the porch rail. Before they could knock, the door opened and a young woman appeared, probably no more than 25, with dark hair and a kind face, carrying a baby on her hip. "Ryan, good to see you. Who is your friend?" she asked, her eyes curious but welcoming. "Mrs. Richardson, this is Eleanor Garrett." "Eleanor, this is Mary Richardson. I mentioned to Eleanor that you were looking for household help and she is interested in the position if you are still hiring." Mary's face brightened. "Please come in, both of you, and Eleanor, call me Mary. Mrs. Richardson makes me feel like an old woman, and I am only 24. The inside of the house was clean and comfortable, though Eleanor could see the signs of a household stretched thin. The dust accumulating in corners, the dishes stacked by the sink, the general air of a home where there was more work than hands to do it. They sat in the parlor, and Mary settled the baby in a cradle before turning her full attention to Eleanor. "Tell me about yourself, Eleanor. Ryan would not have brought you here if he did not think well of you, and his judgment has never steered us wrong." Eleanor explained her situation, leaving out the worst details of her treatment by Mrs. Hutchins, but being honest about her lack of formal experience with household management, beyond the washing and basic cooking. Mary listened intently, asking occasional questions, her manner so warm and genuine that Eleanor felt her nervousness easing. "I am not looking for someone with fancy training," Mary said when Eleanor finished. "I need someone reliable and hardworking, someone who can help keep this house running while I manage the baby and eventually more children. My husband and I plan to have a large family, God willing, and I need help I can depend on. The work is steady, but the hours are reasonable. Breakfast preparation starts at 5, and evening cleanup usually finishes by 7 or 8. Sundays are light duty, and you would have time for yourself. Room and board plus $15 a month, with increases as you take on more responsibility. Does that sound acceptable?" $15 a month was more than Eleanor had made in 3 months working for Mrs. Hutchins. She nodded, afraid to speak in case her voice betrayed how close she was to crying with relief. "Wonderful," Mary said, smiling. "We can set you up in the small room off the kitchen. It is not large, but it is private, and it has a good bed and a window that catches the morning sun." "When can you start?" "Right now, if you need me," Eleanor said. "Perfect. Let me show you around." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind as Mary walked Eleanor through the house, showing her where everything was kept, explaining the daily routines, introducing her to the few other people who helped around the ranch. There was an older woman named Martha who came in 3 times a week to help with the heavier cleaning, a ranch hand named Tom who kept the kitchen supplied with firewood and water, and of course the steady stream of cowboys who came to the main house for meals. Ryan appeared as evening approached, cleaned up from his day's work, his hair damp as though he had washed at the pump. He found Eleanor in the kitchen, where she was helping Martha prepare dinner for the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. "Settling in all right?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with that easy confidence she was already coming to associate with him. "Yes," Mary is wonderful, and the work is so much more manageable than what I was doing. I still cannot quite believe this is real." Eleanor looked up from the potatoes she was peeling, meeting his eyes. "Thank you, Ryan. Truly. You changed my life." "You changed your own life by having the courage to accept help and make a change," Ryan replied. "I just opened a door. You were the one who walked through it." Martha glanced between them with knowing eyes but said nothing, focusing on the stew she was stirring. Ryan lingered, asking Eleanor questions about her day, telling her about the cattle they had been moving to a higher pasture, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in his presence, the conversation flowing naturally despite their short acquaintance. Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into her new life at the Double R Ranch with a sense of profound relief and growing happiness. The work was steady but not overwhelming, and for the first time in years, she went to bed at a reasonable hour and woke rested. Her hands began to heal, the raw skin toughening into calluses but no longer cracking and bleeding. She gained weight, no longer missing meals, and color returned to her cheeks. Mary proved to be not just an employer but a friend, the two young women often talking long into the evening after the day's work was done, sharing stories and dreams. But it was Ryan who occupied Eleanor's thoughts most often. He made a habit of stopping by the main house each evening, ostensibly to discuss ranch business with Mr. Richardson, but always finding time to seek out Eleanor to ask about her day, to make her laugh with stories from the range. She learned that beneath his quiet exterior was a sharp wit and a thoughtful mind, that he read books when he had the chance, that he had dreams of someday having his own small ranch where he could raise quality horses alongside cattle. "You think about the future a lot," Eleanor observed one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sun set behind the western hills in a glory of orange and gold. "I guess I do," Ryan admitted. "When you grow up the way I did, watching your parents struggle and fail, you learn to plan, to think ahead. I never want to be caught unprepared the way they were. I have been saving money for years now, learning everything I can about ranching and animal husbandry. Mr. Richardson has been good about teaching me the business side of things too, not just the cowboy work. How much longer before you can afford your own place?" Ryan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "2 more years, maybe 3 if I want to do it right, buy enough land to really make a go of it. There is a piece of property about 5 miles east of here that is coming available, good water and grass, enough space to run 100 head or so to start. That is my goal." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said softly, and she meant it, though the thought of Ryan leaving the Double R, of not seeing him every day, created an unexpected ache in her chest. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "Would you want to see it sometime? The property, I mean." "I know it is presumptuous to ask, but I would value your opinion." Eleanor felt her heart skip. "My opinion? Ryan, I do not know anything about ranching or land." "No, but you know about making a home. You know about gardens and practicality and all the things that make a house more than just a building. I would like to hear what you think." She agreed, and the following Sunday, Ryan borrowed a wagon from the ranch, and they drove out to see the property he had been dreaming about. It was beautiful land, gently rolling with a creek running through one corner, stands of oak providing shade, and views that stretched for miles across the foothills. There was a small cabin already built, rough but solid, and Ryan walked her through it, pointing out what he would fix, how he would expand it, his enthusiasm infectious. "You could have a garden right here," he said, leading her to a flat area near the cabin with good sun exposure and access to the creek. "And there is enough space for chickens and maybe a milk cow, whatever you wanted." Eleanor froze, her breath catching. "Whatever I wanted." Ryan stopped, seeming to realize what he had said, and color crept up his neck. Eleanor, I did not mean to be forward, but I guess I should just say what I am thinking. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, have been the best of my life. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop imagining what it would be like to build a life here, to turn this land into a real ranch with you by my side. I am not asking you to marry me right now. I know that would be rushing things. But I am asking if you might consider someday, when we know each other better, if you might want that too. Eleanor stared at him. This good man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had not known how to voice, who had insisted she rest, who had given her a chance at a new life, who looked at her not with pity but with respect and genuine affection. Her heart swelled with an emotion she barely recognized because it had been so absent from her life, the warm, spreading feeling of being valued, of being seen, of being cared for. "Ryan," she said softly, stepping closer to him, "I would consider it, more than consider it. These weeks with you I have been happier than I can remember being. When I think about the future now, you are always in it. And this land, this dream of yours, I can see it so clearly. I can see us here, building something together." The smile that spread across Ryan's face was like the sun breaking through clouds, and he reached for her hands, holding them gently. "Can I court you properly then? Can I take you on rides and bring you flowers and all the things a man should do when he is trying to win a woman's heart?" "Yes," Eleanor laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Yes, you can court me, though I think you have already won my heart, Ryan Edwards." He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home, and Eleanor rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, breathing in the scent of leather and sunshine and possibility. They stood like that for a long moment, two young people who had found each other against the odds, dreaming of the future they would build together. The courtship that followed was something from a storybook, or at least from the kind of story Eleanor had never dared to imagine for herself. Ryan was attentive and thoughtful, bringing her wildflowers he picked on the range, saving the choicest pieces of fruit when someone brought a crate from town, teaching her to ride better so they could explore the foothills together. They talked for hours, sharing their histories, their hopes, their fears, learning each other with the intensity of people who had spent too much of their lives alone and were hungry for genuine connection. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson watched the developing romance with obvious approval, Mary often conspiring to ensure Ryan and Eleanor had time together, suggesting Eleanor needed help with some errand that would require Ryan's assistance, or arranging for them to ride together when supplies needed fetching from town. The other ranch hands teased Ryan mercilessly, but with affection, happy to see their serious young colleague so obviously smitten. The summer gave way to fall, the hills turning gold and brown, the air taking on the crisp edge of approaching winter. Eleanor had been at the Double R for 4 months when Ryan asked her to take another ride with him, this time without explaining their destination. They rode west this time, climbing higher into the foothills, until they reached a ridge that overlooked the entire valley, Yosemite visible as a distant cluster of buildings. The Double R Ranch spread out below them, and beyond that, the land Ryan dreamed of owning. He helped her dismount, and they stood together taking in the view, the vast sweep of California landscape stunning in the golden afternoon light. Ryan was nervous, Eleanor could tell, his hands fidgeting with his hat, his jaw working as though he was rehearsing words in his head. "Eleanor," he finally said, turning to face her, "I know we have only known each other a few months. I know that by some standards that is too quick to be making big decisions. But I also know that I love you. I am completely, utterly in love with you. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love the way you laugh and the way you care for others and the way you see the world. I want to build a life with you, to turn those dreams we have talked about into reality. So I am asking, right here with the whole world spread out before us, will you marry me? Will you be my wife? Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure happiness, of disbelief that her life had transformed so completely from that midnight in the wash house when she had been scrubbing clothes with bleeding hands. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Ryan, I will marry you. I love you too. I love you so much." Ryan let out a whoop of pure joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed, and then he was kissing her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, he reached into his vest pocket and produced a simple gold ring, a delicate band that had belonged to his mother. "It was the only thing of hers I kept," he said quietly, slipping it onto Eleanor's finger where it fit perfectly. "She would have loved you. She would have been so happy to know I found someone like you." Eleanor touched the ring reverently, honored to wear something so precious to him. "I wish I could have known her. I wish I had something of my own mother's to bring to our marriage, but everything was sold when she died." "You bring yourself, and that is worth more than any material possession," Ryan said firmly. "We will make our own traditions, our own family treasures to pass down." They were married 6 weeks later, in early November of 1883, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Yosemite. Mary stood up with Eleanor, and Mr. Richardson with Ryan, and most of the Double R Ranch hands crowded into the pews, cleaned up and dressed in their Sunday best. Mrs. Hutchins did not attend, but Eleanor found she did not care, too focused on the joy of the moment, on the way Ryan looked at her with such love and devotion, on the promises they made to each other before God and their community. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Yosemite, a luxury Eleanor had never imagined experiencing, and Ryan was gentle and patient, making her first time special despite her nervousness. They talked late into the night, holding each other in the darkness, making plans for their future and marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. "6 months ago, I was alone and exhausted and had lost all hope," Eleanor whispered. "And now I am married to the most wonderful man I could imagine, and I have a future full of possibilities. It does not seem real." "It is real," Ryan assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And it is only going to get better. I promise you that, Eleanor. I am going to spend every day of my life making sure you are happy and cared for." They returned to the Double R as a married couple, moving into one of the small houses on the ranch property reserved for married workers. It was modest, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen, but Eleanor threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains from fabric Mary helped her purchase, arranging their few belongings with care, planning the garden she would plant come spring. She continued working at the main house, but with reduced hours now that she had her own household to manage, and she and Ryan settled into the rhythms of married life with the ease of 2 people who had found their perfect match. The first winter of their marriage was harsh, storms sweeping down from the Sierra Nevada and blanketing the foothills in snow. The ranch work became grueling, with the cowboys spending long hours checking on cattle, breaking ice on water sources, hauling feed to animals that could not forage through the deep drifts. Ryan came home exhausted most nights, but he always had a smile for Eleanor, always took time to ask about her day, to hold her close and remind her how much he loved her. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in March, and their joy was boundless. Ryan became even more protective, insisting she not overwork herself, helping with household chores despite his own exhaustion. Mary was thrilled at the news, already planning to share baby clothes and advice, and the whole ranch seemed to celebrate with them. "I want a boy first," Ryan said one evening, his hand resting on Eleanor's still flat stomach. "A strong boy to help me with the ranch work." "What if it is a girl?" Eleanor teased. "Then I will have a daughter who can outride and outwork any boy in the county, and I will be proud as can be," Ryan replied, grinning. "Honestly, I do not care what we have, as long as you and the baby are healthy." Eleanor gave birth in late October of 1884, a year and a half after she and Ryan first met, to a son they named James, after Ryan's father. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mary and the local midwife, and there were moments when Eleanor thought she might not survive. But she pushed through with Ryan's voice in her ear, his hand gripping hers, his presence giving her strength. When she finally heard her baby's first cry and felt his warm weight placed on her chest, Eleanor wept with relief and overwhelming love. Ryan was besotted with his son, spending every spare moment holding him, talking to him, planning all the things he would teach him as he grew. Eleanor watched her husband with their child and felt her heart swell with love, grateful beyond measure for the family they had created. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier now with an infant to care for, but rich with the kind of happiness Eleanor had once thought was reserved for other people. James grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby, hitting each milestone while his proud parents looked on. Ryan continued working at the Double R, but he was also aggressively saving money, his dream of his own ranch still burning bright. When James was 8 months old, Ryan came home one evening practically vibrating with excitement. "The land is for sale," he announced. "The property I have been watching, it is officially on the market, and I have enough saved now. We can make an offer." Eleanor's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "It is a big risk. I am sure. I have been preparing for this for years. Mr. Richardson has agreed to help us get started, said he will sell us some breeding stock at cost and help us drive them to our land. And I have already talked to the bank about what we would need to borrow to buy equipment and supplies until we are self-sustaining. The numbers work, Eleanor. We can do this." They made the offer, and after some negotiation, the land was theirs. Ryan gave notice at the Double R, and the Richardsons, while sad to lose him, were genuinely happy for the young family. Mary and Eleanor cried together, promising to visit often, to maintain the friendship that had meant so much to both of them. In the spring of 1886, when James was 18 months old, the Edwards family moved to their own land. The cabin was rough, and there was endless work to be done, but Eleanor had never been happier. She planted her garden, establishing rows of vegetables and a small herb bed near the kitchen door. Ryan worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, improving the cabin, caring for their small herd of cattle. James toddled around, getting into everything, his laughter ringing across their land. The first years of running their own ranch were brutal. Money was tight and the work was endless. There were setbacks, times when Eleanor thought they might lose everything, when a dry summer stressed the cattle or a harsh winter depleted their resources. But they faced each challenge together, Ryan and Eleanor working as a team, supporting each other through the difficulties and celebrating the victories. Eleanor became pregnant again in the fall of 1887, giving birth to a daughter they named Sarah in the summer of 1888. 2 years later, another son, Thomas, joined the family. Each birth was celebrated, each child loved and valued, the cabin expanding with additions Ryan built to accommodate their growing family. The ranch slowly became profitable. Ryan's careful management and genuine skill with both cattle and horses paying off. They developed a reputation for quality stock, and buyers began seeking them out. By the early 1890s, the Edwards Ranch was thriving, not large by the standards of operations like the Double R, but successful and sustainable. Eleanor stood at the window one evening in the spring of 1892, washing dishes after supper while watching her family outside. Ryan was teaching James, now 7 years old, how to throw a rope, while 4-year-old Sarah chased chickens around the yard, and 2-year-old Thomas sat in the dirt making mud pies. The garden was greening up with new growth. The hills beyond were lush with spring grass, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. She thought back to that night nearly 9 years ago when she had been working past midnight in a wash house, her hands bleeding, her hope gone, her future seeming like an endless repetition of exhausting labor and loneliness. She thought about the cowboy who had walked through that door and insisted she rest, who had cared enough about a stranger to change his evening plans and help her finish her work, who had seen her value when she could barely remember she had any. Ryan came inside, brushing dust off his pants, and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we have come," Eleanor said, leaning back into his embrace. "How different my life is from what it once was. How grateful I am that you insisted I rest that night, that you saw me and decided I was worth helping. You were always worth helping. You were always worth everything," Ryan said, turning her in his arms so they were face to face. "But you should know, Eleanor, you saved me as much as I saved you. I was just going through the motions before I met you, working and saving but not really living. You gave me something to work for, something beyond just survival. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to get up each morning excited about what the day might bring." Eleanor kissed him, this man who had become her whole world, the father of her children, her partner in every sense of the word. "I love you, Ryan Edwards. I love you too, Eleanor Edwards." More than words can say. They stood together in their kitchen, the sounds of their children playing drifting through the open window, the ranch they had built together spreading out around them, and Eleanor felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had been a washerwoman working till midnight, exhausted and alone and hopeless. But a cowboy had insisted she rest, had cared enough to help, and from that single act of kindness had grown a love story that transformed both their lives. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. James grew into a serious, hard-working boy who shadowed his father constantly, learning everything he could about ranching and animal care. Sarah was spirited and fearless, as comfortable on horseback as her brother, insisting she could do anything the boys could do. Thomas was the youngest, sweet-natured and curious, always asking questions about everything he encountered. In 1895, Eleanor gave birth to their fourth and final child, another daughter they named Caroline. Ryan insisted Eleanor take on hired help after that, a young woman from town who came 3 days a week to assist with the heaviest household work. Eleanor protested at first, remembering her own years of grueling labor, but Ryan was firm. "You have been working non-stop for over a decade, first for Mrs. Hutchins and then building this ranch alongside me while raising our children. Let someone else do the heavy lifting for a while. You deserve to enjoy our success, not just work yourself to exhaustion maintaining it." Eleanor finally agreed, and the extra help made a tremendous difference. She found herself with time for things she had long ago given up as impossible dreams. She learned to play the piano on an instrument. Ryan bought her one Christmas, practiced until she could play hymns and popular songs. She read books, dozens of them, building a small library in their expanded house. She spent hours in her garden, which had grown from a simple vegetable plot into an elaborate arrangement of flowers and herbs, fruits and vegetables, the pride of the county. The Edwards children thrived, growing strong and healthy under their parents' loving attention. James, as he reached his teenage years, showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. His skill with horses and understanding of cattle breeding already impressive. Sarah shocked some of the more traditional neighbors by insisting on learning everything her brother learned, refusing to be confined to traditionally feminine roles. And Eleanor and Ryan supported her completely, proud of their daughter's independence. Thomas and Caroline were still young, but they too showed signs of inheriting their parents' work ethic and values. Ryan and Eleanor became respected members of the community, known for their fair dealing and willingness to help neighbors in need. Ryan never forgot how Mr. Richardson had mentored him, and he made a point of taking on young ranch hands and teaching them properly, giving them opportunities to learn and advance. Eleanor was equally generous, often taking in young women who needed work, teaching them skills and helping them find their footing, remembering her own desperate circumstances all those years ago. They maintained their friendship with the Richardsons, visiting several times a year, the two families remaining close despite the distance. Mary and Eleanor would spend hours catching up, sharing stories about their children and the challenges of ranch life, while Ryan and Mr. Richardson discussed cattle prices and land management, and all the intricacies of their shared profession. In the summer of 1899, James turned 15, tall and strong and capable, more than ready to take on significant responsibility on the ranch. Ryan officially made him a partner in the ranch operations, and James swelled with pride at his father's trust. Sarah, at 13, was equally involved, her particular talent with horses leading Ryan to start a side business breeding and training quality saddle horses, with Sarah as the primary trainer. Eleanor stood at the edge of their property one evening that summer, watching the sun set over the hills they had called home for 13 years. The cabin had long since been replaced by a proper house, 2 stories with a wide porch and enough room for their large family and occasional guests. The garden stretched along one side, lush and productive. The corrals and barn were well maintained and functional. Cattle bearing the Edwards brand grazed across their land, and the small herd of breeding horses Sarah was developing showed tremendous promise. It was everything they had dreamed of that day Ryan had proposed, and more than Eleanor had dared imagine that desperate night in the wash house. She was 34 years old now, a wife and mother, a ranch woman who knew how to work hard but also how to rest, how to enjoy the fruits of her labor. Her children were healthy and thriving. Her husband still looked at her with the same love and devotion he had shown from the beginning. Her life was full and rich and meaningful. Ryan found her there, as she had known he would, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close. His hair had a few threads of gray now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but he was still the handsome cowboy who had walked into her life and insisted she rest. "What are you thinking?" he asked, the same question he had been asking for 16 years. "That I am happy," Eleanor said simply. "That I am grateful, that if I could go back to that night when we met and tell that exhausted, hopeless girl what her life would become, she would never believe me." "She would be right not to believe," Ryan agreed. "Because this is better than anything either of us could have imagined back then. We were just 2 people trying to survive, and somehow we found each other and built all this." He gestured at the ranch spread out before them. "But you know what the best part is?" "What?" "We are not done yet." We have years ahead of us still. Years to watch our children grow and have families of their own. Years to keep improving this ranch. Years to spend together. This is not the ending, Eleanor. It is just the middle of our story. Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had changed her life so completely. Then I cannot wait to see what comes next. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The ranch quiet around them except for the gentle sounds of cattle and horses settling for the night. Somewhere in the house, their children were finishing evening chores, safe and loved and secure in the knowledge that they were valued. The years continued their steady march, bringing both challenges and joys. The children grew up, one by one finding their own paths. James, at 20, fell in love with a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and Ryan and Eleanor hosted a beautiful wedding on the ranch in 1904. The young couple built a house on the far corner of the Edwards property, joining their land and operations, expanding the family business. Sarah, shocking everyone but her parents, announced at 18 that she wanted to attend a veterinary program, one of the few in the country that accepted women. Ryan and Eleanor supported her dream, proud of their daughter's ambition. She left for school in 1906, writing long letters home about her studies and the animals she was learning to treat. Thomas showed an unexpected talent for business, handling the financial aspects of the ranch with an aptitude that exceeded even his father's considerable skill. By the time he was 17, he was managing all the buying and selling, keeping the books, and ensuring the ranch operated at maximum profitability. Caroline, the youngest, combined her mother's love of growing things with her father's business sense, developing an orchard operation on part of the ranch property that quickly became a significant income source. In 1909, James and his wife made Ryan and Eleanor grandparents for the first time, a grandson they named Ryan after his grandfather. Ryan Edwards, holding his tiny namesake for the first time at age 45, wept openly, overcome with emotion at this continuation of the family he and Eleanor had built. Eleanor, at 44, felt the weight of the years but also the satisfaction of a life well lived. Her hands, once raw and bleeding from endless washing, were calloused and strong from garden work and household tasks, but healthy. Her body showed the marks of bearing 4 children and decades of hard work, but she was healthy and active. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her eyes were bright with contentment. She and Ryan sat on their porch in the evenings, rocking in chairs he had built years ago, watching the sun set over the land they had made their own. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the deep knowledge of each other that came from 2 decades of marriage. Sometimes they sat in silence, not needing words to communicate, their hands linked, their hearts aligned. "You remember what you said that first night?" Eleanor asked one evening in the summer of 1911. "When you walked into the wash house and I was working till midnight, I said you needed to rest," Ryan replied, smiling at the memory. "And that I insisted. You did, and you were right. I did need to rest, but more than that, I needed someone to care enough to insist, to see that I was worth saving. You gave me that, Ryan. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Ryan corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were, Eleanor, just in a different way. You gave me purpose and family and love. You made my life mean something beyond just surviving." They had weathered everything together, the hard early years of establishing the ranch, the challenges of raising children, the inevitable difficulties and setbacks that came with any life. But through it all, their love had remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. Sarah came home in 1912, degree in hand, one of the first female veterinarians in California. She set up a practice serving the ranches in the area, her skill and knowledge quickly making her indispensable to the community. She never married, finding fulfillment in her work and her family, and Eleanor and Ryan supported her choice, proud of the trailblazing path she had carved. Thomas married in 1913, bringing a schoolteacher named Helen into the family, and they built a house in Yosemite while Thomas continued managing the business side of the ranch. Caroline married the following year, her wedding another joyous celebration on the ranch property, and she and her husband took over the orchard operation completely, living in a cottage they built among the fruit trees. By 1915, Ryan and Eleanor were grandparents 4 times over, with more grandchildren surely to come. The Edwards Ranch had grown to over 1,000 acres, one of the most successful operations in the region. The original cabin where they had started was still standing, preserved as a reminder of their humble beginnings, a place where Eleanor would sometimes take her grandchildren to tell them the story of how their grandparents had built everything from almost nothing. She told them about the washerwoman who had worked till midnight, about the cowboy who had insisted she rest, about the love that had grown from a single act of kindness. She told them about the importance of hard work, but also the importance of caring for each other, of seeing when someone needed help and offering it without expecting anything in return. "Your grandfather saved my life," she would say. "Not by doing anything dramatic or dangerous, but simply by seeing me as a person who mattered, who deserved better than what I had. And in return, I got to spend my life loving him and building all this with him. That is the real story of our family, the foundation everything else is built on." The children would listen, wide-eyed, trying to imagine their capable, confident grandmother as that desperate young woman, trying to understand a time when she had nothing. And Eleanor was glad they had trouble imagining it, glad her grandchildren lived lives of security and love, glad the legacy she and Ryan had built would continue through generations to come. In the summer of 1918, Ryan and Eleanor celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration, tables set up in the yard, food spread out in abundance, music and laughter filling the air. Ryan and Eleanor stood together, greeting guests, accepting congratulations, marveling at the life they had built. As the sun began to set, Ryan took Eleanor's hand and led her away from the party, walking to their favorite spot on the ridge overlooking the property. They stood together as they had so many times over the decades, looking out at the land they had made their own. 35 years, Ryan said quietly. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean. Sometimes I still feel like that 18-year-old girl, terrified and exhausted. Other times I cannot even remember being her." Eleanor leaned against Ryan's solid presence. "But I remember you walking through that door. I will always remember that moment when everything changed. The best decision I ever made was stopping that night. The best thing I ever did was insist you rest." Ryan turned to face her, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that had never diminished over the years. "I love you, Eleanor Edwards. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Ryan Edwards, with everything I am and everything I have. You gave me a life I never dared to dream of. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. You gave me yourself, and that was the greatest gift of all." They kissed as the sun set, just as they had so many times before, the sound of their family's laughter and celebration drifting up from the ranch below. The land they had built together spread out around them. Two people who had started with nothing but hope and determination and love, who had taken that foundation and built something lasting and meaningful, something that would endure long after they were gone. As they walked back down to the party, arms around each other, Eleanor reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From a desperate washerwoman working till midnight to a prosperous ranch woman surrounded by family and love, all because a cowboy had cared enough to insist she rest. It was not the story she would have written for herself at 18, exhausted and hopeless in that wash house. It was so much better than anything she could have imagined. And as she looked at Ryan, his face creased with smile lines earned from decades of laughter, his eyes still lighting up when he looked at her, Eleanor knew that every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this life, this love. They had built something real and lasting, a legacy that would continue through their children and grandchildren, all stemming from a single moment of kindness, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. The party continued late into the evening, the ranch alive with joy and celebration, and Eleanor stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by the family she and Ryan had created, and knew with absolute certainty that she was blessed beyond measure. This was her happily ever after, earned through hard work and determination and love, and it was more wonderful than any fairy tale.